WNBA can no longer dodge the topic of players' rest in the collective bargaining agreement. That, according to Bloomberg, and it raises some interesting questions on Yahoo Sports Daily. Caroline Fenton, Jason Fitz, obviously the biggest star in the game now being gone for the year is a huge question mark, Caroline, and everybody's going to look for someone to blame. And I just go back to, I watched that last game where she came back in against Connecticut. She looked a little hobbled from the outset on it. And the minute she reached for her leg, you knew something was off and you knew something was wrong. And at the time, there was a real conversation of, hey, did they rush her back? What contributed to this? Soft tissue issues are hard to predict. It's hard to project what's going to happen. But certainly when the biggest star in the sport now turns out that they're going to miss the entire season, people are looking for someone to blame. I just don't know that I could turn around and make rest the crux of that.
Yeah, it's a little bit too much for me to turn around and blame something else. Injuries happen, right? Especially soft tissue injuries are so sensitive. They can be really weird. You can think that you're totally healed, and then all of a sudden, just one little tweak could be the thing that, for Caitlin Clark's case, keeps you on the bench for the rest of the season. So maybe that's how things went, that she thought, no, I'm good. I feel good. Trainers and doctors said, yes, we trust you. We trust your evaluation. We think that you are in a good place. And then she went back out there and it turns out that her recovery wasn't in the place that it should have been. So I think it's just a little bit too tricky to evaluate soft tissue injuries because there is no one concrete timeline of recovery for soft tissue injuries. It can be, a week, it could be a year. Knock on wood that it's not a year for Caitlin Clark. I think this just brings up, though, a larger issue within the WNBA. And one thing that the league and the WNBA Players Association is really fighting for in this next collective bargaining agreement is the issue of scheduling, is the issue of cross-country travel. And the NBA counterparts have said, look, sometimes back-to-backs are just part of the game. Like that, like you want more games, you want more teams, you want to play, in certain television windows. Sometimes you have to have a little give and take. If you want those things, sometimes you have to do things that you don't want to do, aka long road trips, back-to-backs. But to that, I say the WNBA has a much smaller roster size than the NBA. On average, in 2024, NBA teams were playing 19 different players. In the WNBA, they were playing 11 different players on average in the course of the season. That's a massive difference. So when you don't have a lot of rest, when you do have cross-country travel, and you have a smaller number of players that are available to play on any given night, well, then you do end up with injuries like this. You do end up with a certain level of exhaustion. I look at the New York Liberty and kind of the way that they've fallen off in the second half of the season. They've been dealing with injuries. Jonquel Jones, Brianna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, 3 of their stars have been left on the bench with injuries of some form or fashion. But if you look at the Liberty's schedule over the past month and some change, they had 2 different West Coast road trips in 2 weeks. They played the Minnesota Lynx 3 times in the span of 1 week, twice at home, once at Minnesota. So that's Minnesota traveling to New York twice in 2 different weeks. Like the scheduling doesn't make sense. The road trips don't really make sense. And if you want to have those back-to-backs, or you really need to have some of those back-to-backs, well, then you need to have more players available, which means larger roster sizes and a higher salary cap. So I think it's all of these things, all of these issues within the WNBA. It's not just rushing players back from injury.
But I do think that the Bloomberg article just speaks to the public dynamic of this argument right now that is happening between the WNBA and the WNBA-PA. The Players Association, to me, like you look at any article and any source and any journalist and ask who benefits from it, and you probably have an idea of where the context is coming from. The context of saying the Caitlin Clark season injury and ending injury leads to a conversation about rest. Well, let's look at it. She played a home game on a Wednesday, a home game on a Friday, a home game on a Sunday, and then they traveled to Connecticut for a game on Tuesday. What part of that sounds rest related? I mean, I understand your point. I do think that there are some questions that they need to ask about roster sizes and all of the things that we've been talking about for the last year for the WNBA and the growth of what's next. But using Caitlin Clark's soft tissue injury as some reason that the entire league needs to re-examine the way that they handle rest, when in fact she wasn't playing back-to-backs. She wasn't going across the country. Like, that's why to me, this is boy who cried wolf, and it's one of the problems I have with the way these negotiations are already being handled between the league and the Players Association. When you make things that aren't a big deal because you want the publicity for it, you lessen the impact of actually important issues that you need to talk about. If they want to have a conversation about rest, and they want to have a conversation about back-to-backs, and they want to have a conversation about health, that's fine. Have that conversation, but don't disingenuously loop in your biggest name to make the conversation feel like it has more weight when all that does is take some of the weight against the very argument. Like, we sat here for about a week after the NBA playoffs and said, we might have an issue with all these Achilles injuries we saw. We might have an issue.
Yeah.
And then after about a week, you realize that fans honestly don't care. They just want to see basketball. Like, they don't really care the how and the why. All the load management conversations that we bore ourselves with during the NBA, that, like, I cannot say that loud. When this show gets to the NBA season and we're forced to talk about load management, I'm going to remind you all that nobody really cares. Because at the end of the day, all we really care about is who wins championships and what people play like in the playoffs. So nobody gives a damn about a random November. It's just a talking point, right? So the league, the NBA, has made back-to-backs this huge conversation. Now we're trying to make it a W conversation on the back of Caitlin Clark when she wasn't playing in a back-to-back. She wasn't playing in a load management situation. She wasn't playing in a stress situation. She just had a re-injury of a soft tissue injury. So it feels to me like the NBA PA is using the media to try and be the talking point for an argument that is just flat out baseless on this particular instance.
Well, and it doesn't take a whole lot of work to just dig a little bit deeper and see that Caitlin Clark is not the only injured player in the WNBA this season. Just look at her team. At one point in time, the Fever were without a healthy point guard when Sydney Colson and Arian McDonald went down. Sophie Cunningham had to play the point for the first time since 8th grade because the Fever didn't have another option.
Crazy.
And then Sophie Cunningham went down with a season-ending injury. So now you look at the Fever, they are down 4 players going into the postseason. That's just the Fever. I mentioned the Liberty's injury woes. Nafisa Collier was on the bench for a certain period of time. Like, we're talking about stars. Caitlin Clark, Sabrina Ionescu, and Nafisa Collier. And that is just a really short list of the amount of injuries that have plagued the WNBA this season. Caitlin Clark is the face of the league. She will be used as an example for several things. But I think that, to your point, Fitz, and I think it's a very well-made one, I think the argument would be even stronger if you just look at the sheer number of injuries in the W and point to that, the volume of injuries that have kept all of these players off the court for a certain period of time, more than just Caitlin Clark. And Caitlin Clark's injury will impact the W. It has impacted the W. I hope it doesn't impact viewership or attendance in the postseason. Unfortunately, I feel like it probably will to a certain extent. But it is more than just Caitlin Clark, as devastating as Caitlin Clark's injury has been this year.